we'll be ready in just a moment. Can you see my screen, Allison?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. And hello again, everyone. It's 12:01 and we're just waiting a few moments for people to get all settled and join. We'll start shortly. Thank you. Oh, hi, Leora. Hope you've been well. It's been a while. And I see a few other names I recognize, so thank you all for being here. Just checking Facebook to make sure we're live. I see a few other names. Yep, there we are. You ready, Allison?
I'm ready.
So good day, everyone. I'm not sure what to say. It's not afternoon, so good day, everyone. My name is Dylan Campbell, and I have two roles here at Maine Parent Federation. The first one being that I'm a youth coordinator. So that means I do work with youth around self-advocacy, supported decision-making, and generally all things about the transition from high school to adulthood. My other role is that I'm also a parent trainer. So that means I work and help and design these trainings on all the topics, all the systems of care. And really our goal is to have these as user-friendly trainings, parent-friendly. I'm here today with my co-partner, Allison, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Dylan. So I'm Allison Wiest. I work with Dylan. I'm the other parent trainer for Maine Parent Federation. And as Dylan mentioned, we create and present a lot of trainings around all the systems of care and really trying to make them as parent friendly as possible. Prior to this role as a parent trainer, I was also a family support navigator for Maine Parent Federation. And if you're familiar with that, it's our parent to parent model. Parents that have had experience with the different systems of care, and then we sort of match them with other families that need assistance navigating them. So I've done that for a few years prior to this role as a parent trainer. And I'm also a mom to a 9-year-old boy with autism. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm happy that you're all here today, and hopefully we can give you a little bit more information about special ed. So I'll let Dylan take it away from here.
Yeah, so this is also our first training that we've done in the past few months. So I'll just give you a quick refresher of who Maine Parent Federation is, what we are, and what we're doing. So first off, we're Maine's Parent and Training Information Center. So what that means is we provide trainings like this, and we create family-friendly resources. But we're also Maine's Family to Family program. And that's our Family Support Navigator program that Allison had just mentioned. And these are parents that we have all throughout the state. They're experienced parents who have navigated the systems of care in their own lives. They're trained on all of our trainings, and we match them with other parents throughout the state. This is just an example of one of the trainings that we offer. We have trainings that cover, today is special education. So this is our general overview of special ed. But we also have some more specialized training on the transition into kindergarten, the transition from high school into the world of adulthood, and supported decision making. And over the next few months, we'll be hosting a monthly webinar at noontime. So we hope you stay connected with us. But let's jump in and get started. Just a couple more housekeeping things. Maine Parent Federation is not a legal services agency, and we do not provide legal advice. So you can think of the information we're providing today as a public service announcement. And I also want to keep this as interactive as possible. And I understand it's a webinar format, so please feel free to use the chat box. We're live streaming on Facebook as well. And if you have questions there, please post them and we'll try to answer them after we end our webinar today. So special education is a huge and complex topic, and we're not expecting you to become experts on special ed law in our hour-and-a-half webinar today. But we do hope that this training today helps you have an idea of the general overview of how special education works in Maine. So we'll start off with an introduction to the special education regulations, and we'll cover both the federal and the state laws. Then we'll move forward and talk about the purpose and the structure of the IEP and the 504, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences there. And then we'll move forward and talk about procedural safeguards and due process. And procedural safeguards are the rights that you have as a parent. So breaking it down to the most basic level, all public education is provided by the federal and state departments of education. So at the federal level, that's the United States Department of Education. And here in Maine, that's Maine's Department of Education. So who oversees special education? Well, at the federal law, special education is mandated by IDEA. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this is overseen by the Federal Office of Special Education Programs. That's OSEP. Here at the state level, special education is mandated by Maine's Unified Special Education Regulations. You'll also hear that referred to as MUSER or Chapter 101. Special education is overseen by Maine's Department of Education, Office of Special Services. So IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the federal law that oversees all things special education. And the IDEA provides federal financial assistance to state and local agencies to ensure a free and appropriate public education through special education programs and related services to eligible children. There's a couple key takeaways from this presentation today. And then the first one being a FAPE. That's a free and appropriate public education. And the right to a free and appropriate public education is an educational entitlement of all students in the United States with a disability. And all public schools must follow this federal law, IDEA, in order to receive that federal funding. So there are 4 parts of IDEA, and without going into too much detail, part 1 lays out the foundation for the rest of the act. So this defines the terms used within the act, and it also provides for the creation of that Office of Special Education Programs. And that Federal Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, they're responsible for administering and carrying out the terms of IDEA. So the first part lays out the rest of the act, defines the terms, and then creates the Office of Special Education Programs. Part B and Part B 619 provides assistance for the education of all children with disabilities, 3 to 21. But it also declares that states are required to educate students with disabilities and then provides financial support to state and local school districts. Specifically, Part B 619 details the guidelines for children 3 to 5. Part C recognizes the need for early intervention for young children. It does this by providing guidelines concerning the funding and services for kiddos birth through 2 years old. And then it also identifies who is responsible for child find. And we'll break down that a little bit further in the next couple of slides. But it also indicates eligible services for families through Part C of IDEA, and then who is responsible responsible for providing those services. The last and final part of IDEA is, and this describes the national activities to improve education of children with disabilities. It does this by providing grants to improve those education and transitional services. But it also provides resources to support programs, projects, and activities which contribute to positive results. The Maine Parent Federation actually receives a grant from OSAP, which is made possible by Part D of this law. MUSER is Maine's education law. Oh, I moved too fast. So MUSER, Maine's Unified Special Education Regulations. This is our state's special education law. MUSER must meet or exceed the federal law of IDEA. So the protections within MUSER cannot be less than what is included in IDEA. And we have a link down here below to view a copy of MUSER online. But if you'd also like to receive a paper copy, you can contact MPF offices. You'll notice within that copy that there are italicized language and non-italicized language. The language within italics is the state added language. That's where Maine exceeds the services, supports, and protections provided by IDEA. That non-italicized language you'll see within MUSER, that is the language directly from that federal law, IDEA. Another defining feature of special education is the term specially designed instruction. So special education is specially designed instruction provided at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. So specially designed instruction allows for the altering of the curriculum to be delivered in a way which is accessible to the student. It's a key part of defining what special education is.
What does FAPE include? So again, going back to free and appropriate public education that we spoke about as being one of the key features. So it would include access to, again, specially designed instruction conducted within all school classrooms. So this doesn't just include academics, it would also include unified arts, such as physical education, music, and art, and it is throughout the entire school day. It would also include, if deemed appropriate by the IEP team, access to the specially designed instruction received at home or in other places like hospitals. So if a student was in a hospital or at home for some reason, they would also have access to specially designed instruction in those settings as well. And then it would also include services and accommodations, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. But the services, including the services that are on the IEP, which we're also going to talk about, and then accommodations, sort of removing the barriers to the education and creating a more accessible education for the student. So some examples of services could include speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, consultation from specialists, that would be like a BCBA perhaps, counseling services, and then also extended school year services as well. And then some examples of accommodations that I was speaking about. So that could look like extra time for schoolwork, including standardized tests, planned motor breaks throughout the day, preferential or flexible seating, taking tests verbally rather than written, and paraprofessional support, that being your ed tech support that your student would receive throughout the school day. And again, just to sort of reiterate what I was saying before, with accommodations, there's no changes to the educational curriculum. It's just a matter of making it more accessible for the student. So again, special education can also include instruction for these following items as well: positive behavioral interventions and supports, so PBIS. You're not familiar with this. This is a method used to identify and support behaviors It's intended to provide a positive learning environment of feeling safe and engaged, connected to the school day, and have a shared vision with teachers and students. We do have, I believe we have, if I'm correct, Dylan, a training on PBIS that we can make available to you if that's something that interests you. So, so it could include PBIS, as I mentioned, other behavioral plans, social emotional skills, independent living skills. Again, moving forward, transition plans for adulthood and vocational rehabilitation.
I would also like to mention, we have a full training on that transition to adulthood as well. So please contact us. So what is the IEP? The Individualized Education Program. Well, essentially, it's a document which ensures that all children with disabilities have access to that free and appropriate public education. There it is again, FAPE. So the IEP indicates special education services and accommodations which will be provided based on a student's unique and individual needs. Eligibility for an IEP is determined by Maine's Unified Special Education Regulations, which is Maine's special ed law. The IEP is then developed by the IEP team. So how does this process begin? Well, all schools are mandated to engage in Child Find. And Child Find is a method by which states identify which students need access to special education services. It requires that districts find and then identify students who have disabilities. And referral can occur at any time, be made by multiple individuals. But Child Find is when a school district is tasked with finding all children who qualify for special ed services in that district. A child who is homeschooled or enrolled in a private school is still entitled to receive evaluations. However, they are choosing to give up their access to special ed services, as this only applies to public school education. For kiddos birth to 2 years old, in this age range, it can be challenging to diagnose. So the term developmental delay is the qualifying diagnosis. For developmental delay, they look at all of the following areas for development compared to their peers, and see if they're making the gains that are expected. If developmental delay is diagnosed, at this point, an IFSP will be written, and that means an individualized family service plan. So for kiddos birth to 2 years old, it's not an IEP, it's an IFSP. For kiddos 3 to 5, developmental delay can still be used to qualify. It can be used to qualify up until age 5. At this point, however, we're getting rid of that IFSP and we're writing an individualized education plan, an IEP. And then the student will be placed in their least restrictive environment. And the least restrictive environment, it isn't necessarily always the mainstream classroom. This is where the individual can succeed best. So it's really a combination of, the where the education is taking place, the how, the who is involved, and it'll change depending on the needs of each student throughout the day.
Yeah, and I just wanted to piggyback on that as well. Dylan and I were talking about this yesterday. So my son, as I mentioned, is 9 years old in 3rd grade and was last year, as much as he was in school, was mainstreamed most of his day. We determined this year that it was really difficult for him to focus within the mainstream classroom, just a lot of distractions. And so it made more sense for him when he's working on his academics to sort of be pulled into a quieter environment to be able to really focus. So again, that would be considered his least restrictive environment, not necessarily in the mainstream class, but in an area that is suitable for him to receive his learning.
Nicely said, Allison. Thank you. Then for part B, which is kiddos age 5 to 20, At 5 years old is the last year that developmental delay can be used to qualify for special ed services. So at this point, eligibility is based on one or more of the 13 identified disabilities. I don't have them listed right here, but I will read them off real quick. And the 13 identified disabilities are autism, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and then visual impairment, including blindness. So to be eligible for special education services, you must have one or more of those 13 identified disabilities, and then that disability must negatively impact your ability to access education in the general curriculum. And what that means is that it's not simply enough to have a disability to be entitled for special education. That disability must also negatively impact or impair your ability to access education within the general curriculum. And this link down here at the bottom is a list of those 13 disabilities you can find.
So now looking at the initial IEP meeting. So again, a referral, as Dylan had mentioned, can come from Child Find, so it can come from the school district. It could come, from a therapist, or it could come from a parent as well. So an initial IEP meeting will be held within a reasonable time period after that initial referral is made. In that initial IEP meeting, going to be looking at concerns, but also looking at strengths, and then discussing what will help to determine which evaluations are needed to be completed. So again, talking about what the concerns are, and then figuring out what evaluations will help to get more information. And then review of the student's current present level of performance, or PLOP. And again, that could be looking at academics, can look at social and emotional well-being as well. So in that initial IEP meeting, again, just really sort of evaluating, looking at what needs, what needs to be looked at, and how we can get those evaluations done to determine what needs to move forward. Excuse me, sorry, stumbling over my words there. And again, with the IEP meeting, so the team must meet annually at a minimum to revise and update a student's IEP. And again, that's just at a minimum. I know in my own experience, we tend to meet a couple of times a year at least. Some reasons for an IEP meeting, again, would be to review those evaluations. So once the initial IEP meeting has happened and you've determined what evaluations are going to be done, the team would get back together to review the evaluations, again, determine the present level of performance, and then to measure the progress towards the student's goals and adapt goals accordingly. Again, goals are ever changing. Students are, meeting their goals, or maybe the goals need to be adapted or changed. So that would be another reason for the team to meet. And then to allow parents and teachers the opportunity to provide updates on the student, and then also to consider changes to services and accommodations. And then just another important thing to note is that, again, a parent can request an IEP meeting at any time. As I mentioned, we do, and there it is, we do, in my team, we meet a couple of times a year. So did you know parents may request a meeting to review the plan at any time throughout the year? So again, as a parent, you are an important part of the team, and you can request a meeting at any time. So, so in determining goals for an IEP, some things obviously that we're looking at and considering is academics, reading, writing, math. We're looking at social and emotional well-being, functional, developmental areas, behavioral, and then also therapeutic. So things like OT, PT, and speech. And again, those are sort of the services that could be included on an IEP. And then determining accommodations. So again, sort of how The education will be delivered, making it more accessible to the student. And that could be things like sensory items to avoid or seek out, preferred seating, breaks, assisted technology, additional time to complete work and tests, and then advanced warning of emergency drills and headphones. And again, I can speak to my own personal experience from my son. A lot of challenges, with receiving sensory. He gets overwhelmed and overloaded a lot. So he does have headphones when there is an emergency drill, and he does have his fidget toys and these different types of things. He has more motor breaks. So again, these are sort of all built into his day to sort of help him be successful at school. So when the IEP team determines it's necessary to perform evaluations, the school has 45 days to conduct the evaluation and hold an IEP meeting to discuss the results. So again, once you determine what the evaluations are going to be, they have 45 school days. So again, school days being those do not include weekends or breaks or professional development days. Those are actual school days that they're in session. With CDS, however, it's 60 calendar days. So there is a difference there. And then another note to make is parents should receive results of evaluations at least 3 days before the IEP meeting. And again, in my experience, at one point, there was a person on the team, my son's team, that did an evaluation, and I didn't receive the evaluation until the day before the meeting. Which is really not ideal from a parent perspective, not having the ample time to review the evaluation and sort of prepare for the meeting. So ideally, receiving that evaluation 3 days before is helpful in preparing for the meeting. So, and you can request to reschedule an IEP meeting if you don't receive the evaluation in ample time to review.
So then, in addition to the annual IEP meeting, IDEA also requires triennial reviews every 3rd year. So at the triennial IEP meeting, this can have a slightly different focus than your typical IEP meetings. But the purpose of this meeting is to assess if a student's needs have changed and to really determine if they continue to be eligible to receive those special education services. And then again, provide data which will help inform IEP goals. And the triennial meeting can be particularly difficult for parents, as this is often a time where you're reflecting on challenges and needs versus strengths and accomplishments. But the goal of this meeting is to really see if a student's needs have changed and to see if they continue to be eligible for special ed services.
And again, I can speak to that. Yeah, last spring, what my son was due for his triennial, and it definitely is a difficult meeting, sometimes emotional for me, and that again, we're really focused on the challenges, and so just trying to sort of take a deep breath and realize that the reasoning behind it is just to ensure that that he is still eligible and that he gets the services that he needs. So planning for the IEP meeting, again, important to note that the school sends an advance written notice 7 days prior to a meeting. And in that advance written notice, it includes a list of who will be present at the meeting and then states the reason for the meeting. It is important to read the advance written notice. I know sometimes in talking with other, parents, we sort of set it aside and we don't look at it, but it is important to take a look at the advance written notice. And then best practice or a tip from us is that parents should notify the IEP team of any additional people they plan to bring to a meeting. So if you have somebody from the outside, even maybe in FSN when we sort of are more in person, if you have somebody from the outside that you're planning on bringing to a meeting, it's important to let the IEP team know that you're planning to do that. And then in the orange box, parents must inform the team if they're planning to bring legal representation or record the meeting. So again, you are required to let them know if you're bringing legal representation, and they actually do have the right to cancel the meeting if for some reason, that they're unaware that you're bringing somebody. So again, best practice to let them know that you're bringing somebody, but required to let them know if that somebody is legal representation. And then again, some more tips from us as you're sort of planning for the meeting. I definitely plan in advance for IEP meetings, and determining your list of your priorities. What are your sort of top 3 concerns? I think is a great strategy. A lot of times, some of the other things will sort of fall under those 3 concerns. But really planning, having your sort of top 3 points written down, your questions. And then again, if you don't get to those, you can always, again, as a parent, request another IEP meeting to go over those types of things. But also think about possible solutions. It's helpful to have sort of your points and concerns, but also some potential solutions that can be discussed at the IEP meeting. And then also bring data to assist in any requests that you're making. If you have something from an outside therapist or counselor that you think would really be helpful and sort of, making your case or help you get your requests met, it's always important to bring that to the meeting as well. Familiarizing yourself with the IEP team and their role. So it is really good to know who is on the IEP team, and there will be an administrator there from the school department. That's the person who authorizes the funding for special ed. There's the special ed teacher, mainstream education teacher, therapists such as OTs, PT, and speech therapists. And there can be other people in the IEP team as well. I know, again, from my own personal experience, my son has an adapted PE teacher that is always at the meetings. He has a social worker. So those people could also be present in the IEP team. And then also just to remind us as parents that we are a key member of the IEP team as well. And, we know our children best. And so, reflect on any information that you would like to share with your school that you think can help shape your child's plan. So again, your input is important because you know your child best. So again, just sort of preparing and having that information available and ready makes the meeting run much more smoothly. And again, just sort of reiterate our, our MPF tips or best practice is, come prepared with written questions. I think sometimes it can be intimidating in a meeting. And if we don't have it written down, we might forget what we, what we wanted to ask or what our concerns are when we're talking. As earlier in this presentation, we might get fumbled in our words. So coming with those questions written down is helpful. And then if you have a lot to talk about and you have some dates in mind that you could reconvene if you aren't able to address all of your concerns or questions, have those ready, and you can put that out there as well if you don't get a chance to discuss everything you wanted to talk about. So I think just being organized and prepared for the meeting is really key. So after an IEP meeting, again, the school must send prior written notice within a reasonable time before the school plans to take, or they could refuse to take action related to the identification, the evaluation, or educational placement of your child. So again, that's why I had mentioned earlier about really looking at the prior written notice. Sometimes we don't always look at it. But it is an important document that you should look at and make sure that it's accurate. So some examples of when a prior written notice, you would receive a prior written notice would be certainly before an initial evaluation, before changing your child's educational placement or special ed services, and then when a school refuses a parent's request for evaluation. So again, it's really an important document. So again, just a good tip to take a look at it and make sure that it's accurate when you receive it. And parents should receive an updated copy of the IEP within 21 school days. So again, school days not including breaks and weekends. IEP changes, however, will be implemented within 30 calendar days of an IEP meeting. So the changes to the IEP could actually be implemented before you actually receive the copy of the IEP document. So important to note that as well.
So 504 plans. 504 plans are intended to help a student access the general curriculum by building in those supports and accommodations. So that means 504 plans are not a part of special education services. 504 plans do not provide that specially designed instruction that we had talked about. Instead, they provide supports and accommodations. Here's a great graphic. I think it breaks it down in a fairly understandable way. So taking a look at the left side, we have the IEP and which law is responsible. Again, the IEP is overseen by OSEP, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. 504, on the other hand, this is not a special education law. This is a civil rights law mandated by the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. An IEP is overseen by OSEP, whereas a 504 is overseen by OCR. That's the Office of Civil Rights. The eligibility requirements for an IEP are developmental delay if you're under the age of 5. Over the age of 5 is one or more of the 13 qualifying disabilities, and then that disability must negatively impact a student's ability to access the curriculum. On the other hand, the requirements for a 504 are simply having a disability that significantly impacts one or more major life activities. So what is included in each one? For an IEP, that includes special education services, accommodations, and related services. For a 504, that includes accommodations and modifications, but does not include specially designed instruction or special education services. So again, it's a part of the Rehabilitation Act. This is a civil rights law. And this law states that disability should not inhibit a person from receiving a FAPE. So in the 504 plan, that allows for changes to the environment that will remove barriers for a student to access their education. So 504 plan is all about the accommodations and supports. Again, it's not providing that specially designed instruction as that would be special education. And some of the accommodations that you might see in a 504 plan, that can include extra time to complete a test, specified seating, or help with organizing, managing timelines for assignments, as well as assistive technology. So it's building in those supports and accommodations, but it's not actually changing the curriculum. One of the things that is also different about a 504 plan is that there is no standard form or document for a 504 plan. That means that each school has the ability to devise their own plans, and each school will have a 504 coordinator. So the structure of a 504 plan can vary and differ from school to school. Schools are also not required to invite parents to participate in developing the plan or making small changes to it. However, schools do have to notify parents if they're performing evaluations or identifying new diagnoses. Then the procedural safeguards, which we mentioned at the very beginning, that the procedural safeguards are a document which outline your rights as a parent when working with the school. This document does not address the structure of the IEP or 504 plan. Instead, it sets the rules for proper procedures. And you are required, by IDEA, the school is required to provide you a notice of these procedural safeguards. Then how do you address disputes? There are 3 avenues or pathways of addressing disputes. And I say it with quotes because they can happen separately or they can happen concurrently. And that's a complaint, a mediation, and due process. So the first avenue is filing a complaint with the state. And this can be filed by either a parent or organization and alleges that there was a violation of IDEA within the school. At this point, a complaint investigator is assigned and they're tasked with examining the proposed violation. So after the complaint is filed and the complaint investigator examines the violation, they make a ruling. There is no appeal process for the complaint, but if either party is happy with the outcome, they may proceed with mediation and or due process. So at mediation, that's another process of resolving the conflict by which both parties, that's the parents and the school, agree to participate. So a mediator is assigned and a third party mediator is assigned, and both the parents and school present their perspectives to them, as well as participate in discussions about how they think they can resolve their opposing viewpoints. Similarly to the complaint process, there is no appeal process for mediation, and this agreement is considered legally binding. However, again, if an agreement cannot be met, parents can then move forward with due process. And due process is the third and last and most serious method of which you can address a dispute. Oh, sorry, I just saw the chat box. Yes, if you all stick around, I will share you the Google Drive link and you can download the files. Absolutely. And then the third and final and most serious method of addressing disputes is due process. So for due process, a written complaint requesting due process may be filed to the Maine Department of Education by either the parent or the school district. At this point, they have the option of resolving the dispute throughout mediation. However, if they cannot resolve through mediation, a resolution meeting is then required. At this point, there will be a hearing officer assigned to the meeting, and they're tasked with the responsibility of determining whether the violation has occurred and how the violation must be remedied. There is an appeal process if the finding is not acceptable to the parties involved. This is a court process, and there is an appeal process if it's not acceptable.
Again, I think I just wanted to piggyback on that. Dylan and I were talking about this yesterday, and that, you know, obviously this is a serious, you know, a serious matter. And so, you know, always trying to resolve it before getting to this last process, you know, I think is ideal because it can be very long and drawn out and expensive on parents, but also damaging to the relationship that you have with the school. So again, just trying to, you know, come to sort of an agreement prior to this last step is the best way to go, certainly. So I'm sure Dylan would agree with me.
No, nicely said, Allison. Thank you for mentioning that. It's so important to remember that this will probably damage your relationship, and kind of keeping that in mind is helpful. So we just gave everyone a lot of information really fast. So I'm going to take this moment. I want to hear all your questions in the chat box. If you're on Facebook watching, I'll try to answer them after we end this webinar. But I guess, what are your questions for us so far? Would you need
I
any
actually had another
clarification on
thing. Sorry, Dylan. I had another thing that I realized that we didn't mention. And I was thinking that it might be good to mention it is when we're sort of talking about IEPs and 504s. So an IEP actually ends at graduation or aging out at 22, right? And the 504 actually carries on throughout your life. So through secondary education and employment and all of that. So typically we mention that, and we didn't mention that today. So I wanted to just make sure that we mention that as well in case somebody had a question about that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Allison. And if you still would like some more information, like I mentioned, we have other trainings that dive a bit deeper into these topics. One that you might want to look out for is called SMART Goals. And this is our training that talks about how to recognize whether an IEP goal is well written. And another one that might be beneficial is the transition from high school, which discusses that transition planning in years of adulthood. Here are a couple other agencies that we work very closely with. It's only a couple of them. So I really encourage you to, check them out and stay up to date with all the things that they're doing. And one last thing is our family support navigators. And we had mentioned them at the very beginning, but Allison, would you like to explain a bit more about them?
Sure. So as we mentioned a little bit in the beginning, we do have the Family Support Navigator program. And again, it's trained parents. They've been through the trainings that we provide. They have personal experience navigating the systems of care and can provide support to families at no cost to you. So again, I was part of that. It's again, a parent-to-parent model. And, they can, we can help with things like preparing for an IEP, helping you organize your paperwork, or, again, once we sort of are more in person, they can attend IEP meetings with you, among, lots of other things. So this is a great service that we provide. And if you're interested in knowing more about this, certainly let us know.
And if you all just hold tight, I will share the link with you to